The stale air of Port Station 47 filled Marcus Reed's lungs as he stood face to face with the three-armed alien merchant who owed him 50,000 credits. The merchant's green skin had taken on a darker shade, a sign of stress in his species. Marcus didn't care about the alien's distress. He wanted his payment. "What do you mean you don't have my credits?" Marcus kept his voice low, but his hand rested near the stunner on his belt. Around them, the busy spaceport continued its usual chaos of loading, unloading, and the general bustle of beings from 100 worlds. The merchant's three hands moved in nervous patterns. Market crash. Lost everything. "But I have something better than credits." He gestured to a hooded figure standing quietly behind him. "She's worth 3 times what I owed you." Marcus's jaw tightened. "I don't deal in slaves." He had smuggled many things in his years as a cargo pilot. Medicines to regions the big corporations ignored, food to blockaded worlds, even weapons to resistance groups he believed in. But never living beings. Not slave. Bondservant. Very different. Very valuable. The merchant pulled back the hood of the figure, revealing a sight that made Marcus catch his breath. The alien woman stood tall, her skin a pale blue that seemed to shimmer in the harsh port lighting. Unlike the rough-handled slaves he sometimes saw in these outer rim ports, she held herself with unmistakable grace. Her eyes met his, deep purple with hints of silver, showing neither fear nor submission. This was no ordinary slave, and Marcus felt his curiosity stir despite his misgivings. "She's trained in ship systems, navigation, and trade protocols." The merchant continued quickly. "Speaks 17 galactic languages. Better than credits, an investment." Marcus studied the woman more closely. Her features were typical of the crystal rim species, but something about her seemed different. The way she analyzed her surroundings, the subtle shifts in her posture. She moved like someone used to being watched. "What's your name?" he asked her directly. "Lyra," she answered, her voice carrying a musical quality common to her species, but with an accent he couldn't quite place. Not the usual outer rim dialect. The merchant shifted nervously. "Take her. Debt cleared." "Good deal." Marcus knew he should walk away. Slave trading, or even bond-servant contracts, as the merchant claimed, brought the kind of attention a successful smuggler needed to avoid. But something about this situation felt wrong in a way that tugged at him. The woman, Lyra, didn't act like someone who had been sold into servitude. She acted like someone playing a part. A Port Authority drone buzzed overhead, reminding Marcus that this wasn't the place for a prolonged negotiation. He needed to make a decision. The repairs to his ship's hull had eaten into his reserves, and without the credits from this job, he'd have to take on riskier runs to make up the difference. "Documentation?" he asked, still watching Lyra. The merchant quickly produced a data chip, all legal. Bond contract. Medical history. Skills certification. His middle arm twitched. A tell Marcus had learned meant the alien was lying about something. But what? Marcus inserted the chip into his reader. The documents looked legitimate, though that meant little in the outer rim. What caught his attention was Lyra's listed age, 127 local years, young for her species, very young to have the kind of extensive training the merchant claimed. He looked up to find Lyra watching him with those strange purple eyes. She gave him the slightest nod, so subtle he almost missed it. "Fine," Marcus said, surprising himself. Debt cleared. He pocketed the data chip. "Let's go." The merchant's skin lightened with relief. He hurried away before Marcus could change his mind, vanishing into the crowd with practiced ease. "This way," Marcus told Lyra, leading her toward his ship's berth. She fell into step beside him, moving with fluid grace. Not behind him, as a slave would walk, but beside him like an equal. Marcus had smuggled many things in his life, but as he walked through Port Station 47 with his unusual new crew member, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had just smuggled something far more valuable and far more dangerous. than he had ever meant to. Marcus's ship, the Star Runner, wasn't much to look at. Its hull bore the scars of too many close calls, and its paint had faded years ago. But it was home, and it was his. He watched Lyra as she entered the cargo hold, noting how her eyes quickly scanned every corner, every exit, every potential hiding spot. Not the behavior of a servant, more like a soldier, or someone used to being hunted. "Engine room's that way," he said, pointing down the corridor. "Crew quarters are up top. You'll have the second cabin." He waited for her reaction to having her own space rather than servants' quarters. A slight widening of her eyes was the only response. "Thank you," she said simply, then added, "Your ship's thrust stabilizers are misaligned by about 3 degrees. Marcus blinked. He'd been dealing with a slight wobble during jumps for weeks, but hadn't pinpointed the cause. "How did you know that?" "The vibration pattern in the deck plates." She walked to the engine room door, her movements precise. "I could adjust them for you. Might save about 12% on fuel consumption." For the next hour, Marcus watched as Lyra worked on his engines with the skill of a master mechanic. Her delicate blue fingers moved across the machinery with practiced ease, making adjustments that would have cost thousands at a repair dock. She even spoke to the ship's computer in its native programming language, something Marcus had never mastered. "Where did you learn all this?" he asked as she finished the calibration. "One picks up various skills," she answered vaguely, wiping her hands on a cloth. Then she said something in a language that made the ship's computer light up with excitement, its systems humming more smoothly than they had in years. "That was Old Imperial," Marcus said, surprised. "The language of the Crystal Rim Royal Court. Not many people know it anymore." Lyra froze for just a moment before recovering. "As I said, one picks up various skills." Later that night, as they broke orbit, Marcus received a strange transmission. The message was heavily encrypted, far beyond the usual merchant codes. Before he could trace it, Lyra appeared in the cockpit doorway. "We should change course," she said calmly. "Why?" "There are 3 ships waiting at the next jump point. They are not friendly." Marcus checked his long-range scanners. They showed nothing, but something in her voice made him trust her. He adjusted their course, taking a longer route through a nearby asteroid field. Sure enough, as they passed their original jump point, his sensors picked up 3 military-grade ships dropping out of hyperspace. "How did you know?" he demanded. Lyra sat in the co-pilot's seat, her movements elegant even in the simple ship's chair. The encrypted message. It was a warning about an ambush, though not one meant for us to intercept. She paused. "They're looking for something. Or someone." Marcus studied her profile in the starlight. "And would they be looking for you?" "There are many people being looked for in this part of space," she answered diplomatically. Then she reached over and adjusted their course slightly. "This route will be safer. It takes us through the Mendari Nebula. The mineral content will hide our engine signature." As they flew on, Marcus noticed more signs that didn't add up. The way Lyra knew complex trade regulations by heart. How she could spot military ships disguised as merchants. Her understanding of planetary customs that even veteran traders struggled with. During their shared meal in the galley, she absent-mindedly corrected his pronunciation of a common trading phrase. Her version wasn't the common dialect. It was the formal language used in high courts. "You're not just a trained servant, are you?" he finally asked. Lyra looked at him for a long moment. "Would it matter if I wasn't?" Before Marcus could answer, the ship's proximity alarm blared. A massive vessel had just appeared on their sensors, bearing the markings of crystal rim nobility. Lyra's face showed the first real emotion he'd seen. Fear. "We need to run," she said quietly. "Now." Marcus threw the Star Runner into a steep dive, narrowly missing the noble ship's tractor beam. His hands flew across the controls as warning lights flashed across the console. Behind them, the massive vessel lit up the darkness of space with its pursuit lights. "They're charging weapons," Lyra said, her voice tense as she worked the sensor controls. but their target locks are set to disable, not destroy. Good to know they want us alive, Marcus grunted, pulling the ship into a tight spiral. Want to tell me why Crystal Rim Nobility is hunting us? A blast rocked the ship before she could answer. More ships appeared from hyperspace, sleek, dark vessels built for pursuit. Bounty hunters. 6 ships, Lyra counted, her fingers dancing across the navigation computer. 3 ahead, 2 port, 1 starboard. She looked at Marcus. I can't let them take me back. Back where? Marcus demanded, but he was too busy flying to press further. The Star Runners shuddered as another shot grazed their shields. The nebula, Lyra pointed. If we can reach it, I know a way through. Marcus laughed despite their situation. That's a death trap. The magnetic storms will tear us apart. Trust me. Her purple eyes met his. Please. Something in her voice made him nod. He turned the ship toward the swirling purple and green gases of the nebula, pushing the engines to their limit. The bounty hunters followed close behind, their shots getting closer with each blast. As they entered the nebula's outer edges, Lyra began calling out directions. 20 degrees port. Now down 30. Hard turn starboard on my mark. Her voice was different now. Commanding, used to being obeyed. The pursuing ships started dropping back, unwilling to risk the nebula's dangers. Only the noble vessel stayed with them, its superior shields allowing it to press the chase. They're powering up something big, Marcus warned, watching his sensors. They'll try to disable us with an ion pulse, Lyra said. When I say now, cut all power except life support. That's insane. We'll be sitting ducks. Now, Lyra shouted. Marcus slammed the power controls to minimum. The ship went dark just as a massive wave of energy swept past them. He watched in amazement as the pulse caught their pursuers instead, sending the noble ship spinning off course. Power up, Lyra commanded. Full thrust. The Star Runner roared back to life, darting deeper into the nebula. Lyra guided them through a maze of magnetic storms and radiation clouds that should have been impossible to navigate. Finally, they emerged on the other side alone. As Marcus began running damage checks, Lyra slumped in her seat. I suppose I owe you an explanation. You think? He turned to face her. Let's start with why the richest nobles in the Crystal Rim want you so badly. Lyra was quiet for a moment. I ran away from an arranged marriage, she said finally. One that would have started a war. A servant's marriage would start a war. No. She straightened in her chair, and suddenly she looked completely different. Gone was the humble servant. In her place sat someone used to power. A princess's marriage would. Marcus stared at her. You're Princess Lyra Valdoran of the Crystalline Empire. She gave a small, bitter smile. Or I was, until I fled. They planned to marry me to the warlord of the dark sectors, to give him a legitimate claim to our throne. And you disagreed with this plan. The warlord would use our empire's resources to launch a war against Earth and its allies. Millions would die. She looked out at the stars. I couldn't let that happen. So I ran, arranged to be sold as a servant, knowing most humans wouldn't look too closely at another alien slave. Marcus ran his hands through his hair. Great, just great. So now I'm harboring a fugitive princess and probably starting an interstellar war. Not yet, Lyra said. But we need to move quickly. They'll figure out how we escaped soon. She pulled up a star chart. I know a place we can hide, gather allies. But you'll have to trust me completely. More than I already have, Marcus asked dryly. Another blast rocked the ship before she could answer. More pursuit ships appeared on the sensors, closing in fast. The Star Runner limped through space, its engines straining after the recent escape. Marcus watched as Lyra worked to repair the damaged systems, her royal bearing now obvious in every graceful movement. The truth about her identity explained so much, yet raised even more questions. The Dark Sector's warlord, Marcus said, handing her a tool she needed. Everyone knows he's been trying to expand his territory. But marriage, that's a new trick. Lyra's hand stilled on the circuit board she was fixing. The warlord is smart. My people respect tradition and bloodlines above all else. With a royal marriage, he gains legitimate claim to our technology, our trade routes, our armies. She looked up at him. Most importantly, he gains our crystal drives. The faster-than-light technology that only your people can create. Marcus nodded. With that, he could strike anywhere in the galaxy. And Earth would be his first target. Lyra's voice grew hard. Humans are the only ones who've ever successfully resisted his expansion. He hates your species for it. A warning light flashed on the ship's console. Marcus checked the readings and swore. We've got company. 3 ships just dropped out of hyperspace. But Lyra smiled. Don't worry. They're friends. She moved to the communications panel and sent a complex series of signals. The approaching ships responded with their own pattern of lights. Friends? Marcus asked skeptically. There are others who oppose the warlord's plans. Other nobles, traders, even some of my personal guard. She typed in more commands. We've been building a network of resistance. Your ship's repairs are about to get a major upgrade. The 3 ships drew closer, revealing themselves as high-end repair vessels disguised as ordinary freighters. They docked with the Star Runner using magnetic seals, and soon teams of engineers were swarming through Marcus's ship. As they worked, Lyra led Marcus to a secure compartment in one of the repair ships. Inside, screens showed maps of the galaxy with countless dots of light representing ships, bases, and allies. This is bigger than just avoiding a marriage, isn't it? Marcus asked, studying the displays. Much bigger. The warlord's agents have infiltrated my father's court. The marriage is just a cover for a full coup. Lyra's fingers traced paths between the stars. Once he has legal access to our worlds, his hidden forces will strike. The Empire will fall in days. And you running away spoiled his plans. It bought us time. As long as I'm free, he can't claim any right to our throne. She turned to face him. But we need proof of his treachery. Real evidence that will convince my father and the Royal Council. Marcus watched as the repair crews installed new systems in his ship, weapons disguised as cargo containers, shields masked as ordinary hull plating, and sensors that could spot an ambush from light years away. Why tell me all this? He asked finally. Why trust a random human smuggler? Lyra's purple eyes seemed to look right through him. Because you could have sold me the moment you realized what I was. The reward would have made you rich beyond dreams. She stepped closer. Instead, you ran from people who could have destroyed you. You risked everything to help someone you thought was just a slave. Before Marcus could respond, one of the repair crew rushed in. Princess, we've intercepted a transmission. The warlord's fleet is moving. They're heading toward the Crystal Rim capital. How long? Lyra demanded. 3 days at most. He's forcing my father's hand. Lyra said grimly. Without me there to refuse the marriage, he'll demand emergency powers to help search for me. She turned to Marcus. I know I have no right to ask more of you. Marcus looked at his ship through the viewport, now armed and armored for a war he never meant to join. But as he watched Lyra's determined face, he knew he'd already made his choice. Well, he said with a small smile, I hear the Crystal Rim capital is lovely this time of year. Shall we crash a royal party? The Crystal Rim capital planet glowed like a jewel against the darkness of space. Its famous crystal towers caught the light of 3 suns, sending rainbow patterns across the atmosphere. Marcus had never seen anything so beautiful or so heavily guarded. 20 patrol ships in the outer ring alone, he muttered, checking the Star Runner's enhanced sensors, plus defense platforms, scanning arrays, and enough firepower to vaporize a small moon. Good thing we're not fighting our way in. Lyra stood behind his chair, watching the approaching planet. She wore her old servant's clothes, but now they seemed like a costume rather than genuine attire. The warlord's fleet will arrive in 6 hours. We have to get to the palace before then. Their plan was risky. Marcus would pose as a merchant bringing exotic goods to the palace, with Lyra acting as his servant. Her resistance allies had provided perfect forged documents, but one wrong move would get them both killed. "You don't have to do this," Lyra said softly. "I can find another way in." Marcus checked their course one more time. "Little late to back out now, Princess." "Don't call me that," she said sharply, then softened. "I'm still Lyra. Titles don't matter anymore." The comm system crackled with an incoming transmission. "Merchant vessel Star Runner. Transmit cargo manifest and landing codes." Marcus sent the forged documents while Lyra pulled her hood up, hiding her distinctive features. They held their breath as the patrol ships scanned them. "Manifest accepted. Proceed to landing pad 7 Gamma." They descended through the layers of security, each pass making Marcus's heart beat faster. The upgraded systems in his ship worked perfectly, showing them as nothing more than a simple merchant vessel. The landing pad was a crystal platform extending from one of the smaller palace towers. As they touched down, Marcus saw other ships arriving. Grand vessels carrying nobles from across the empire, all gathering for the emergency session Lyra's father had called. "The warlord will have agents everywhere," Lyra warned as they prepared to leave the ship. "Watch for anyone wearing black crystals. Those are his personal guard." Marcus nodded, checking the hidden blaster under his merchant's robes. "How will we know which nobles we can trust?" "We don't." Lyra's voice was grim. "That's why we have to get to the secure vault beneath the throne room. It contains a truth crystal, ancient technology that can reveal any deception. If I can present our evidence there, not even the warlord can lie his way out." They walked through crystal corridors filled with aliens of every species. Nobles in flowing robes swept past them without a glance. Servants scurried about with last-minute preparations. Guards stood at every intersection, their armor gleaming. Lyra kept her head down, playing her role perfectly, but Marcus noticed how her steps traced old, familiar paths. This had been her home. He wondered what it felt like to return as a fugitive. They were almost to the throne room when Lyra suddenly gripped Marcus's arm. Coming toward them was a tall figure wearing black crystal armor, surrounded by guards. "The warlord," Lyra whispered. "He's early." Marcus forced himself to keep walking at a steady pace as the galaxy's most dangerous warlord approached. The alien was massive, his gray skin covered in ritual scars, his eyes cold and calculating behind his crystal visor. As they passed each other, the warlord paused, his head turned slightly toward Lyra. Marcus felt her tense beside him. One word from the warlord, and they would be surrounded by guards. One signal, and their entire plan would fail. But the warlord merely nodded at what appeared to be a simple servant and continued on his way. Marcus released the breath he'd been holding. "He suspects something," Lyra said once they were alone in a side corridor. "He's too cunning not to." "Then we better hurry." Marcus checked the time. "How do we get to this vault?" Lyra pressed her hand against a seemingly solid crystal wall. It shimmered and became transparent, revealing the hidden passage. "We go down," she said, "all the way down to the heart of the palace." She looked at Marcus with worry in her purple eyes. "This is the point of no return. Are you sure?" Marcus took her hand. "Lead the way, Princess." The hidden passage led them deep beneath the crystal palace. The walls here were raw crystal, unpolished and ancient, glowing with a faint inner light. Their footsteps echoed in the narrow corridor as they descended further into the heart of the planet. "The vault was built by the first Empress," Lyra explained softly. "She created the truth crystal to ensure no lies could ever tear the Empire apart." She touched the rough walls. "These crystals are the oldest in the known galaxy." A distant boom shook dust from the ceiling. Marcus looked up. "Sounds like the warlord's fleet arrived early. He's making his move." Lyra quickened her pace. "The emergency council will be gathering now. Once my father declares a crisis, the warlord can claim emergency powers to protect the Empire." They reached a massive door made of pure crystal, its surface carved with ancient symbols. Lyra placed her hand on it, and the crystals began to sing, a high, clear note that made Marcus's teeth vibrate. The door dissolved into light, revealing a circular chamber. In its center floated a crystal unlike any Marcus had seen. It shifted colors like oil on water, seeming to exist in multiple places at once. The truth crystal, Lyra breathed. It sees through all deception. Before they could reach it, shadows moved in the darkness. Armed figures stepped out of hidden alcoves, weapons raised. The warlord himself emerged from behind a crystal, his black armor drinking in the light. "Princess," he said, his voice like grinding stones, "how kind of you to return, and with such interesting proof of my plans." He held up a data chip, the same one containing their evidence. "How?" Marcus demanded, reaching for his hidden blaster. "You really think I didn't recognize her?" The warlord laughed. "I let you pass earlier because I knew you'd lead me here, to the one place where evidence against me would be undeniable." He crushed the data chip in his armored hand. "Now there will be no proof at all." More soldiers appeared behind them, cutting off their escape. Lyra stood tall, her servant's disguise forgotten. "You won't win," she said. "The people will never accept you. They already have." The warlord gestured, and a hologram appeared showing the throne room above. Nobles were gathered in panic as alerts flashed. "My fleet is rescuing the capital from mysterious attackers. By the time this night ends, I'll be hailed as a hero." Marcus watched the soldiers closing in. All those weapons, all that armor, and yet, something wasn't right. "You made a mistake," he said suddenly. The warlord turned to him. "Oh, and what would a human smuggler know of imperial politics?" "Nothing," Marcus admitted. "But I know ships. Your fleet arrived too perfectly timed, too coordinated. Almost like," he smiled, "almost like they were waiting for a signal from inside the palace." Lyra's eyes widened as she understood. In one smooth motion, she spun and pressed her hand against the nearest wall. The ancient crystals hummed in response. "What are you doing?" the warlord demanded. "The palace crystals record everything," Lyra said. "Every word, every signal. You just admitted to coordinating with your fleet. The truth crystal doesn't just see through lies. It can reveal recorded truth." The floating crystal in the center of the room flared to life. Images and sounds filled the chamber. The warlord's secret commands, his ships waiting in hyperspace, his orders to attack the capital. "No." He raised his weapon, but Marcus was faster. His shot caught the warlord's arm, making him drop his blaster. Lyra's voice rang out, amplified by the crystals themselves. "Guards of the Empire, hear the truth." The chamber's recording broadcast throughout the palace. The soldiers looked at each other in confusion as their leader's treachery was exposed. The warlord roared in fury and charged toward the truth crystal, perhaps hoping to destroy it. But the crystal's light intensified, and where it touched his armor, the black crystals began to crack. "Your own crystals betray you," Lyra said. "They know their true masters." Above them, they could hear shouts and running feet. The palace guard would be coming, but the warlord still had one card to play. "Kill them," he ordered his soldiers. "Kill them now." The chamber erupted into chaos as blaster fire filled the air. The ancient chamber became a battlefield. Marcus pulled Lyra behind a crystal column as blaster fire filled the air. But something strange was happening. Half the warlord's soldiers had lowered their weapons, the truth crystal's revelations shaking their loyalty. "Traitors," the warlord bellowed. His armor was cracking more with each passing second, the black crystals falling away in shards. "I'll kill you all myself." He reached for something on his belt, a small device that pulsed with dark energy. Lyra gasped in recognition. "Crystal Breaker," she shouted. "He'll destroy the whole chamber." Marcus didn't hesitate. He dove out from behind the column, tackling the warlord just as he activated the device. They crashed to the ground, wrestling for control. The warlord was incredibly strong, but his armor kept cracking, pieces falling away. Above them, the truth crystal's light grew intense. It bathed the chamber in waves of color, and where it touched the warlord's soldiers, their black crystal weapons began to dissolve. Palace guards burst into the chamber, led by a tall figure in royal armor. Lyra's father, the Emperor himself, stood in the doorway, his face a mask of fury as he witnessed the warlord's treachery firsthand. "Take them," he commanded, but there was no need. Most of the warlord's soldiers were already surrendering, their loyalty broken by the truth they'd witnessed. The warlord howled in rage and threw Marcus aside, making one last grab for his crystal breaker. But Lyra was there, her hand touching the nearest wall. The ancient crystals responded to her royal blood, growing and shifting, encasing the warlord in a prison of pure crystal. "My daughter," the Emperor said, his voice soft with wonder. "You came back." Lyra stood tall, no longer a hidden princess or a pretend servant. "I never left, Father. I was protecting our people the only way I could." The truth crystal pulsed one final time, showing everyone in the chamber visions of what would have happened. The warlord's fleet destroying Earth, his armies conquering peaceful worlds, the Crystal Empire becoming a force of destruction rather than harmony. As Imperial guards led away the captured soldiers, Marcus picked himself up, wincing at his bruises. He wasn't sure what happened next. He'd gone from smuggler to fugitive to hero in a matter of days, and now stood in the most sacred chamber of the Crystal Empire. The Emperor turned to him. "You protected my daughter." "Actually," Marcus said with a small smile, "she did most of the protecting." He looked at Lyra. "I just provided the ride." Nevertheless, the Emperor's crystal armor chimed softly. "You have earned a place here, if you wish it. There are those who would welcome a human perspective in our court." But before Marcus could respond, Lyra stepped forward. "Father, our empire needs to change. The warlord nearly succeeded because we're too isolated, too wrapped in tradition." She gestured to the truth crystal. "Our ancestors built this to protect us from lies, but we've hidden ourselves from truth as well." The Emperor was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. "Perhaps you are right." He looked between Lyra and Marcus. "What do you suggest?" "Open trading routes with Earth," Lyra said. "Real ones, not just the outer rim markets. Share our knowledge, learn from others." She took Marcus's hand. "And let people choose their own paths, even princesses." The Emperor's eyes crinkled with what might have been a smile. "It seems my daughter learned much during her time away." He touched the wall, and the crystals sang in response. "So be it, but we will need someone who understands both worlds to help build these bridges." Marcus squeezed Lyra's hand. "I might know a cargo pilot looking for steady work." The chamber filled with soft crystal light, like the dawn of a new day. Above them, the warlord's fleet was surrendering to Imperial ships. The crisis was over. "So," Marcus said to Lyra, "does this mean I no longer own a royal slave?" Lyra laughed, the sound echoing like crystal chimes. "No," she said, her purple eyes shining. "Now we're partners." The truth crystal pulsed one last time, as if in approval. In its light, human and alien, royal and commoner, past and future, all stood together, forging something new and stronger than before.